uncertainty for over 25 years. And at that point, I realized I was old. We're here today to talk about 5 EPM tools to survive and thrive in this uncertain time. It's difficult, to put it mildly, to plan when everything is changing. The general concept is called uncertainty planning. What is uncertainty planning? Well, traditional financial planning and forecasting is assuming that things are going to keep trending roughly the same. That past performance is the best indicator of future results. If things are going up, they'll probably go up. If things are going down, they'll probably continue to go down. Uncertainty planning is preparing for, what if our organization, our industry, what if the entire economy goes in a completely different direction? It just suddenly veers. Companies started doing uncertainty planning related to the potential that industry would be disrupted. So industries like taxis, hotels, newspapers, retail brick and mortar started going through massive changes extremely rapidly. So they had to say, well, what could a plan be? How could I deal with it if all of a sudden the world started swerving? But now we're doing uncertainty planning across all industries because the world is changing due to COVID-19. And we don't yet know how severe that impact is going to be. The last 10 weeks have been unlike any other we've ever seen. It has been unique, and one day we will all be telling our grandkids about the days when we had to shelter at home. We'll tell them we had to hashtag WFH and then explain what a hashtag is. I don't believe those will continue on for the rest of time. My advice, write down your thoughts, make a journal, make some home videos with your iPhone or Android, show them to your grandchildren someday. But one thing I do know is I'm going to give you a bit of certainty. What we are starting out today is the launch of a 10-week journey. We're going to bring you a little certainty in an uncertain time. So this is our launch on what those tools might be. What we're going to cover over the next few weeks is how to actually use those tools and use them right now. 10 weeks doesn't seem that long. Sure, Edward, I can commit to being there for the next 10 weeks, and I'm sure you're going to give me something really awesome at the end. But let's pause for a moment and look at how much has changed in the last 10 weeks. The week of February 17th, the Dow was over 29,000. China was well into their outbreak, but except for some small outbreaks in South Korea and Singapore, the only other real country suffering badly at that point was Italy. That was the week they finally locked down due to pressure from other countries in the European Union because they couldn't restrict Italy from coming in. So they said, Italy, you have to restrict your own people. So they said, nobody can leave the borders of Italy. 9 weeks ago, the week of February 24th, Trump appointed Pence to lead the nation's coronavirus response. That was the week we had our first death. Literally, it was only February 24th. The week of February 24th, as far as we knew at the time. The week of March 2nd, the US hit 100 cases and the first US colleges started shutting down classes. The week of March 9th, the World Health Organization declared coronavirus a pandemic and the US announced travel restrictions from Europe. It was also the week that the NBA suspended operations in what was to be a cascading series of sports leagues after that. The week of March 16th, the world really started to change. Now, keep in mind, this is less than 6 weeks ago. The US issued its first guidance on social distancing. It was adorably naive. It actually said, avoid gatherings of more than 10 people for the next 15 days. That was the first time that the government recommended avoiding discretionary travel. It was also the first time that the government said we potentially could have an R word, recession. And on March 17th, the first shelter-in-place order in the entire United States was issued to lock down San Francisco, the Bay Area. Now, you're thinking, well, it was just a cascade and everybody agreed and started doing it once they started it. Actually, no. If you go back and look at that exact same week, Mayor de Blasio said, New York City will never be shutting down. The week of March 23rd, the Dow, keep in mind just how brief that is, bottomed out at 18,500. That same week, in response, the USA approved a $2.2 trillion stimulus package. Now we're at the end of March, less than 4 weeks ago. Trump announced social distancing for the country would extend until April 30th. And it wasn't until April 3rd that the CDC said, maybe we should start wearing face masks in public. was also the week that a lot of the airlines started slashing their flights. Looking for some good news, April 6th, Wuhan came out of their 76-day lockdown. They actually had a big celebration where they turned on all the lights. Week of April 13th, the government gave guidance to states on how they could start reopening when they see fit. I am curious how that's going to go. And just this week, if we want to go back to a little bit of bad news, oil prices for the first time in history did something I did not realize was possible. They went negative. Sellers were actually paying buyers $37 a barrel to take West Texas crude off of their hands in the month of May because they had nowhere to store them. And if I could end on a really bit of bright news, as of today, I just checked again, Kim Jong-un still says there are 0 cases of coronavirus in North Korea. So not all bad. If you really want to move somewhere where there's no coronavirus, at least according to the dictator, apparently that's North Korea. All of our customers, all of you, are going through this period of accelerated change. At the start of March, when we were all still traveling, people were going, GDP growth might slow, but at the start of March, nobody was predicting a recession. Today, just a brief period into that 10 weeks, our customers are fighting for the survival of their companies. And while everyone is hoping that the economy recovers quickly, there are a few tools that companies absolutely must have to make it through this downturn. So today I'm going to cover those 5 tools at a high level. I'm going to give you a sample of each one of those, just to give an idea of how you could use it at your own company. The absolute most important tool companies need right now is scenario planning. During times of massive upheaval, the finance department and other departments crunching the numbers go from being overhead to being the most important department in the entire company. Why? Because during times of change, people crave information. We don't know which scenario is going to be correct, which is why we have to do scenario planning for a lot of possible different scenarios. It's important to have those plans ready at hand, not just a set of numbers that probably look really bad right now, but a set of actions. If X situation occurs, we will take Y actions to deal with it. There are 4 other tools that are important at times like this. Strategic modeling. This helps you figure out what your constraints are. When are you going to violate your debt covenants? When will you use up your available cash? When will you need greater capital lending? Profitability and cost management. Please don't wait on this one. You have products, services, locations, customers that are making you money. Find out which of those 20% are resulting in 80% of your profitability. But also find out what products you should be stopping, what locations you need to be closing, what 20% of your customers are costing you 80% of your profitability. Then take those unprofitable locations, products, services, channels, those unprofitable money drains, and stop doing them. Stop doing them now while you actually have liquidity. Data visualization and real-time analytics. You have to make sure that you're absorbing information as it comes in. As I talked about earlier, our situation is changing entirely too rapidly. I can't believe it's only been 10 weeks. You can't wait until the quarter closes to find out what happened. If there's data that's going to cause someone to take a different physical action or cause them to ask a deeper question, you have to get it to them now. And finally, narrative reporting. People think that narrative reporting should only be used after the fact to explain budget and forecast variances to actuals. My advice with narrative reporting, use it ahead of time. Use it to communicate all those scenarios that you plan. Use it to communicate how you're going to respond when it's clear which of those scenarios you're actually in. You'll notice that every one of those tools focuses on speed, getting the right information to the right people at the right time so they can make better business decisions faster. As fast as information is changing, we need to deprioritize trying to get accurate information to the nth decimal, and we instead need to focus on speed. We have to be able to generate new scenarios in minutes, not days. So let's begin by talking about scenario planning. This is our first tool for surviving change. Scenario planning helps us determine what scenarios are possible and how we're going to deal with them if they occur. Because there's a lot of uncertainty to plan for right now. There are a lot of terms, a lot of scenarios being tossed around. Which ones make the most sense? Which scenarios should you be planning for in a world where everything is up in the air? I've done all the analysis. These are the 3 most likely scenarios that we are going to encounter. The red curve is the quick recovery. If blue curve is the delayed recovery, green curve is the prolonged recovery. Both the red and blue curves are what are called V-shaped recessions. It's just a matter of how many quarters we go down into the V and how many quarters it takes to go back up again. In my green curve, the prolonged contraction, I'm allowing for a bit more of a U-shaped recession, which is a couple of quarters of decrease, a bottoming out for a bit, and then a slow rise. Some people think of it like a bathtub. But note, this is a bad bathtub. It is not a pleasant jacuzzi at the spa, so let's all pray to our respective gods that we don't end up in the ugly green bathtub. In the quick recovery scenario, we hit our peak of coronavirus cases in April, and the world gets back to spending by the end of June. This causes a decrease in revenue, primarily limited to the second quarter of 2020, April to June. It extends into July, August, and recovers enough that Q3 is actually higher than Q2 because we all go outside, we start spending again, and 70% of GDP is consumer spending. And that by the end of September, we are right back to where we were at the start of 2020. In this scenario, if you believe this is what's going to happen, it's all about short-term risk mitigation. It's about conserving on operating expenses, stabilizing our supply chain, planning to come out of this with immediate resumption of where we were and maybe even stronger. Now, if I may be blunt with all of you, while there are some economists, a lot of really hopeful government people that are thinking it's going to be this going down in Q2 and we are back right to where we were by the end of Q3, I personally view this as very unlikely. I don't think that people will walk outside and immediately start spending all their money again they did previously. I think a more likely scenario is a delayed recovery, where we don't hit our peak of all coronaviruses until summer. This causes us to be worried about coronavirus, but also worried about the economy, enough to cause a decrease in consumer spending for 2 quarters. Essentially, we drop through September, and then we recover over the fourth quarter of this year and the first quarter of 2021. In this scenario, we have to take some aggressive strategies to drive revenue. But at the same time, we still have to know what our least profitable products, our least profitable services, our least profitable locations, our least profitable customers are, so that we can, at least temporarily, suspend the things that are costing us money. In a delayed recovery scenario, layoffs, terminations, furloughs are likely because it takes us a year to get back to normal. Even if you think it's going to be the last one, the quick recovery, my advice, you still start doing your profitability analysis, because if it just happens to be this blue one, or God forbid the green bathtub, if it starts to be one of those situations, you want to immediately be able to say, these are the products we should discontinue right now, these are the locations we should close. So let's talk about the serious recession, the prolonged contraction. And this says we either don't hit our peak in cases until late in 2020, or it comes in waves as quarantines are enacted, lifted, and then have to be reenacted. This is a very possible scenario. If it turns out that there is no clear treatment, that it takes at least 12 to 18 months for a vaccine, and COVID-19 infection rates just become a way of life around the world. As I said before, this scenario assumes more of a U-shaped recession. 2-quarter decrease, 2 to 4 quarters of bottoming out, then a much slower rise out of a recession lasting 4 quarters or more. In this situation, we don't get back to where we are now until sometime in 2022. I know that sounds impossibly long, but if I had to predict, this is the most likely scenario that we're in right now. The numbers seem to be dictating this. We'll see what happens when people leave. It could end up being one of the first 2, but I would definitely plan for all 3 of these. If it does end up being this one, companies are going to have to get back to the basics. You're going to have to stop doing, likely permanently, the things that are costing you money. As you focus on the most profitable products, the most profitable services, the most profitable locations, as you focus on the 20% of your customers that bring you 80% of your profitability. So we think, okay, big picture, nobody else is giving us any better guidance, so I'm going to trust Edward on this one. Plan for those 3 potential scenarios. How do we plan for them? Well, this is where scenario planning comes in. I am absolutely positive, without knowing anything about your numbers, that your budgeted numbers for 2020 are going to be wrong. Hate to break it to you. So it's time to come up with some additional possible situations that might occur. What I'm showing for this entire demo is Oracle EPM Cloud. So any screen you see up on the screen is EPM Cloud. It's what we use at Interrel. This particular one is the planning process inside Oracle EPM Cloud. The first rule of scenario planning No, it is not the same rule as the most awesome movie, Fight Club. The first rule is determine which 2 to 5 scenarios are most likely to occur. Second rule of scenario planning is then take those scenarios and plan your top 5 KPIs for those scenarios. You're going to find out that 5 KPIs will help you derive 98% of your income statement. That's why the third rule of scenario planning is then take those KPIs and derive your financial forecast. So once you have your 2 to 5 scenarios planned, you need to take those forecasts and you have to share them with the organization until everyone knows which actions you will take if one of those 3 scenarios, or 2 or 5, or however many you make, if one of those actually does occur, you know exactly how you will respond. Don't wait till you find yourself in the bathtub to figure out how to get out of the bathtub. So how does this actually work in the real world? I'm going to take an example that applies to 96% of you. It's the start of April. We have just finished closing our books because we weren't doing the daily analysis. So we just finished closing. We got all the numbers in for Q1, and it turns out March numbers don't look good. We've run our normal prepare forecast process. We've updated it with the latest actuals. And notice we have a big dip. If you look at the bottom left of your screen, there's a V, but a V that only goes down for 1 month. That's because that blue line is keeping the forecast the same as our original plan. But we know we're not going to hit that forecast. We know that this was not a 1 month long recession. So even though we have this big dip in March, we have to figure out how that's going to apply to the remaining months going out. To be honest, we, like a lot of governments around the world, didn't take the coronavirus seriously. At our example company here, in this case, I'm making fertilizer. Figure, well, we just have to keep the grass growing. We didn't do any cost-cutting measures in March. So our expenses did stay in line for original forecast. It was our net income that plummeted. Why? Because the expenses stayed high and revenue went down significantly. So it was really that revenue drop that caused our net income to dip. We didn't adjust our expenses quickly enough in March. Well, we're already partway through April, but we better do something. So let's figure out what we actually have to accomplish. Is it a matter of fiddling with our compensation? Is it a matter of figuring out whether we need to reduce hotel expense or reduce airfare, maybe put on a travel freeze, maybe reduce overtime, maybe minimize bonuses? Because at the path we're going under right now, we're going to go from being a couple $100 million profitable to losing a couple $100 million per month. So we need to go check on cash. Do we actually have positive cash flow? Well, we do. It's just lower than we expected. And also keep in mind, this cash flow forecast is wrong. It's no longer accurate beyond the current month. It's still assuming those prior revenue numbers. So it's showing positive cash flow, but it's an incorrect positive cash flow. So in Oracle EPM, it's really easy to go in and add a new scenario, a new version to track different plans for analysis or comparison. So I can look at my different scenarios. I can create one called prolonged contraction, and then I can create a couple different versions of that prolonged contraction. Well, what if I took this mitigation strategy to minimize my expenses? What if I took this one? So in my case, I grabbed the prolonged contraction. I created a new version called mitigation strategy 3, mitigation 3. Now I can easily go in and start creating numbers for it. Because even though I'm saying I recommend 3 scenarios, whether you think it's 2, 3, 4, or 5, each one of those scenarios has to have a set of actions to deal with it. That's the key part of scenario planning. We always start by taking our forecast, copying it over. We then start modifying our global assumptions. We then start analyzing it. Then we start mitigating. We can't stop just by, here's the set of scenarios, somebody else's problem to deal with. We have to say, if this occurred, what would the actions be? So I could, for instance, take a scenario plan that I've got, and I can run a business rule. I can say, copy from my forecast over into a target scenario. So I'm going to copy it into the delayed recovery because I'm knocking on wood and hoping this is a situation that's going to occur. I'm going to copy that into my working scenario. I'm going to say, well, in this particular case, volumes are going to go down 5% in Q2 and Q3. I'm going to reduce salaries by 10% for Q2 and Q3. So it's very minimal mitigation effort. And I can do other things. I could extend it beyond, but because this is my delayed recovery, I'm really going to stick to just assuming the changes are applied to Q2 and Q3. Once I'm all done, I go up and I click on launch. You know what? Let's reduce our rates just a little bit more as well. And maybe drop expenses. I'm just going to type in by 10%. I say launch, in several hours, no, I'm kidding, 5 seconds later, I now have a new situation. So if you go down and look, that orange line at the bottom, that is my delayed recovery. This says, yep, it's going to extend through September, but as we talked about earlier, should be over by that point. I'm getting all the way back to normal. Now all of a sudden I'm back on my previous path. I could create the prolonged contraction scenario where I actually come in and say, do that same rule, copy from my current forecast over to my prolonged contraction. But if I was going to do this one, I would use a lot more of those buckets. I would assume bigger dips. I would also assume it's going to go beyond Q2 and 3. So I would go out there and grab Q4 decreases as well. So in this example, I'm using the pre-built financials modules form because I want to add in adjustments, adjustments by entity, adjustments by product, adjustments by location. I can view the details of the scenario plan just using the standard forms, the standard user interfaces that are provided. But I can take that and start adding in higher level assumptions, higher level adjustments. I can apply dollar adjustments, I can apply percent adjustments. And whatever I enter in, so in my case, I'm like, yep, take the scenario and assume it's going to be a 5% decrease in labor rates. So I'm going to not spend as much as I was. Assume that maybe commodity prices are going to fall as well. As I said, oil is negative at the moment. So assume that those are going to drop down. So we toss all of those out there. And when I'm done and save, notice in this case it runs automatically. I can then go over and look at my new revenue calculation and say, well, maybe I want to see a decrease in overhead, not just of 20,000. I need to see a reduction of 25,000. I'm going to get back to any sort of decent plan. When I'm all finished and save my plan out, I can now go over to the expenses, and this is where I say, yep, I have a pretty good idea of my revenue, and I know what some of those direct expenses are, but there are also some calculated expenses, and there are some things that I can override. So you'll notice that I'm going to make less money than I expected to. I'm going to kind of bend the curve down. I'm going to do a reduction in expenses over where I was. And this is my chemical planning company. So I'm also selling ammonia, a few other things, doing my part for the environment. Oh wait, doing the wrong part for the environment. So I can go out and say, well, right now I'm looking at 81 headcount for the year. Maybe I could decrease that. Maybe I could say there's going to be a decrease in Q2. I don't know how familiar you are with the Oracle EPM. I could also put it at the higher level. I could go up to like year total and say I want to reduce the whole year by 10. It would drop it back. Or I could have put the -5 in Q2 and it would have dropped it back. So I can reduce the number of people. I can also reduce the average salary per person because right now it's at 12,858. I can say, yep, we're capping everybody at 10,000 for right now. We're going to assume no bonuses at this point. And everything it's doing is recalculating what that expense forecast is going to look like. Now, based on all of this, I can quickly navigate out to my scorecard and say, what is the impact going to be? So notice I've created a COVID-19 dashboard. That's one of the things I'll show you a little bit later. And on my COVID dashboard I've made, there's that new prolonged contraction. And notice it doesn't get back up to the forecast for a couple of years further out. I can expand it. And you can see, I love the arrows. It shows me what direction everything is moving. It's moving down, it's moving up, basically how it's changing. And you can see it goes all the way out at least till 2021, if not into 2022 for my prolonged contraction. Okay, now that I've planned what I think is going to happen from a volumes and P&L perspective, well, now how does cash flow look? Actually, it looks really bad. If you look at the yellow stripe up top, all of that yellow stripe is where cash falls below 0. This is not good. So in some months, I need to go modify what that detailed plan is going to look like. Now, the way, for those of you who don't have it, the way Oracle EPM Cloud works is it will feed your financial and balance sheet data over to your cash flow, the direct cash flow method. So what I want to do is modify some of my assumptions, about what my cash flow is going to look like, some of my assumptions about what my payment terms are going to look like. So I could start modifying my timings. For instance, I know that receivables are going to be slower coming in. So I can just say as a big broad brush, it's going to take 50% longer, or it's going to go from 30 days to 45 days to get those in. Now I'm going to use these to update my worst case scenarios because I want to make sure that I have liquidity. That based on what my assumptions actually are, do I need to go out and find additional capital? Of course, you want to go find that capital before you actually need it. So I can use it to recalculate my cash flow forecast. I can do the same thing about my cash flow usages. I could do some payables optimization where I could say I'm going to push out my payments to later time periods. So what's happening behind the scenes, if you're one of those people that's curious on what's going on under the covers, it's looking at the scenario's planned revenue, the cash sources, and it's looking at the expenses, the cash uses, and then it's applying these timing assumptions I just put in to generate what that cash flow is going to look like. So the scenario forecast is all tied together, and that's important. So if you change your assumptions, if you update your scenarios, it just all flows automatically all the way through so you can see the cash impact of it. So we can now see the impact on the cash flow dashboard. So what was happening back behind the scenes is it was calculating all this, but it doesn't actually make the changes. But if I look, June does not look good. That's that biggest dip over there. If you look at kind of the red line and the prolonged contraction. So we were going to repurchase some common stock. I guess we're being an airline at the moment. We're going to minimize that at this point. And as soon as I do, as soon as I change these kind of non-operating cash activities, because now it's probably not the right time to be repurchasing, I can delay it, I can clear it out altogether, even though that was my previous plan. And as soon as I do, I can see cash flow being updated to see that we are now in a positive situation, hopefully. Once I'm done aggregating all this back up, we can see that we are hopefully not going to go bankrupt in June, which is what would have happened if we spent our sole amount of available cash on stock buybacks. Although I guess we could just hope for government bailout. He says only, half kidding. Okay, let me go back over to my forecast. Yep, there's the red one. Now notice it didn't change the orange forecast because I was in the prolonged contraction. So notice in delayed recovery, I still had that 100,000 out there. I could also go out to that scenario and remove its stock buyback as well, or at least delay it to a later period. So this is general, what you want to do with scenario planning. You might be curious kind of what it looks like on a specific industry. So let's say Interrel chose right now to get into running a series of hospitals and clinics. I am being extremely non-creative at the moment, so I'm going to call our organization IRC Health System, Interrel Consulting. Now, IRC Health System apparently picked a bad time, or maybe a good time, to get into this business. But one thing we do know, our forecasts are completely inaccurate. We have to scenario plan because these are changing in unsure times. But the good news, in Planning Cloud, we can take those existing forecasts that we have and we can layer in specific things on top of them. So I want to go out and select that COVID card with my nice little COVID icon up top. Look at my COVID scenarios. And I've got that new dashboard that I created. Within this dashboard, I could select a specific location. So in my case, I want to look within the South. I could look at just Dallas or Houston or Austin. I could go out to the West and look at San Francisco, Seattle, Los Angeles, Arizona. I'm going to stick to Dallas for the moment. I'm also going to look at the moment at Head and Neck Center. And if you'll notice, I can switch between not only looking at dollars, but I can also look at key drivers. So right now I'm looking at revenue, and it's dipping majorly in every scenario, except that original forecast. The original forecast assumes we are right back to normal in April. None of us think that's actually going to happen. Why is revenue dipping? Well, I could say is it going to have an impact on operating income? Yeah, it's going to be really, really bad. We lost $100,000 in the month of March in Head and Neck. But I can also switch to drivers. I can look at things like admissions or patient days, visits. I can look at number of views if I wanted to. So why am I losing money? It's because visits are substantially decreased. And I'm still forecasting it'll get right back to normal, but these, in a lot of cases, are elective surgeries. But notice what happens when I look at visits for emergency center. On the flip side, the ICU, the ER, they are booming. So while the elective departments are minimal, like head and neck, ICU and ER, they're seeing dramatic increases. So what I can do is I can do global adjustments, and I can say take everybody's visits and drop them down by 10%, or take rates and drop them down by 10%. But what I also might want to do is go into very specific departments where I could say total admissions by ICU, well, that's going to go up. Total of visits by emergency center, that's going to go up. Head and neck can decrease. Pediatric can decrease. Why are we doing this? It's so we can take action. So from our side, now that we know that head and neck is going to be decreasing and ER and ICU are going to be increasing, is there anything I can do? Well, if we think about it from a head and neck center, I've got extra people that I don't need right now, just waiting around to do head and neck surgeries. Is it possible I could save more lives right now if I budgeted a lower number of visits for head and neck and budget for a higher number of visits in ER and ICU, and then switch all those people over? So within EPM Cloud, I can actually redirect a number of those direct labor resources from the head and neck center for Q2 by just giving them a negative adjustment and then flipping over to emergency services and increasing their direct labor by everybody I transferred over there. So in terms of visits, I can just drop it down. I can flip over and increase it. Now, they don't have to equal. So somebody might go, well, why don't I just assume that however many fewer doctors and nurses I need in head and neck, we've transferred that many over. How many fewer visits I have here, I have an increase. It's not necessarily going to be the same. Just because you reduce head and neck by 200 doesn't mean 200 more people walk into the ICU or the emergency room. So in my particular case here, I'm planning them as two separate halves. I'm planning for both the decrease on head and neck and then the increase over on ICU. Now, I'm using the web forms. I like the interface. I like being able to see a heads-up dashboard. Let's face it, no matter how pretty your dashboard is, someone's going to export that to Excel. So we actually can do all those exact same type of functions over from Excel. So any form we see over there, we can flip over and grab head and neck, and we could increase things up and down. We could do that same type of spreading I was doing before. So I could put in a higher level number and have it push all the way back. So any of that budgeting functionality, like take my 10,000 decrease in expenses, it'll goal seek and push it back to the months that it can actually change. And as soon as I save, it's back in that same common place. It's not actually stored there in the spreadsheet. One of the things that you're going to probably want to do is go out and slice and dice all this. If you're not familiar with it, everything I've showed, even though it looks like a package application, it in no way stops the ad hoc side. You can get in and do all of your same smart view, drill up, drill down. You can drag dimensions all around. So even though it's in an EPM Cloud application, you can slice and dice and look at all your different scenarios in Excel. So from over here, you could get a quick high view of what was my original forecast. What is that quick recovery that I don't think is very likely? What is that delayed recovery? What's the prolonged contraction? And then slice and dice about all your departments. But let's look at that second tool, that strategic modeling tool. This is the second thing we need during times of major change. What should my strategic plan be within my financial constraints? The likely case, let's all face it, is that a recession will occur. I would say that the odds of a recession not happening, at least a short one, are about the same as the odds that a full-blown depression will occur. So if you want to model all those possible outcomes, all the way from we're going to get back to normal before the quarter even drops, all the way out to it's going to be 10 years long, go for it. I call this strategic modeling. It's sometimes called scenario modeling, sometimes it's strategic planning, sometimes it's constraint-based modeling. Some people call it DBLRFP, driver-based long-range financial planning. Whatever you call it, you're trying to model your revenue, expenses, your balance sheet, and your cash flow so that you have some idea of your liquidity, when you're going to be running out of money if you don't take action. And then you have to make sure that you take action on the strategic models so you don't run out of money. I feel like I'm teaching Economics 101. Why? Because if you do, it's game over. Game over, man, game over. It's my aliens impersonation. So I want to start by making a new model. You notice there are some standard templates, things like higher ed, governmental kind of grant-based organizations. There's healthcare, payer, provider. There's retail, there's utilities. I don't apply to any of those. Just give me your standard default model. When you do, it actually walks you through a wizard. It says, how many years out do you want your strat plan to be? Do you want to plan more detailed for the closer years and maybe higher level, higher out? Like maybe 2019 was by month, but now that we're in 2020 and the sky is falling, let's not do it by month, let's do it by quarter. When we get up to 2021, 2022 and beyond, we only want to do it at a year level. As soon as you're done with the wizard and you've completed those 5 steps, it actually goes off and builds you an entire application, builds you a full recommended high-level chart of accounts. You're not trying to load in all 17,500 portions of your account string. This is really about the big picture stuff. It's revenue, it's taxes, it's interest, it's OPEX, it's COGS. It's common stock adjustments, current liabilities, fixed assets, that type of thing. Once you've created what that forecast looks like, we can then go in and make multiple scenarios. So this is where we can create those same scenarios we did before, but do them in a very quick modeling place. So rather than doing a whole lot of data entry, we're just doing big picture how we're going to change. So we could say, yep, as a big picture, I think expenses are going to run, COGS are going to run roughly 85%. And I'm actually expecting an increase in COGS because we're going to have some disruptions to our supply chain. So getting those goods in will increase my cost of goods sold. I'm going to say about 5%. I can make that adjustment. I can say save. Once calculated, it pushes all that back down so that I have some idea of what my optimistic coronavirus situation is going to look like. It actually gives you some pre-built financials. You can see them in the web application. You can see it in Excel as well. So you can see what impact those are going to have. It's also really easy to make a pessimistic scenario. You can take that current scenario and say, I see a greater increase in COGS, a much bigger decrease in what my revenue is going to look like. Even if I get a handle on SG&A, we're going to be losing something on the order of $700,000 a month or $700 million a month if you're an airline going forward. Now, within scenario modeling, there are a lot of more advanced things it can do. For instance, I could say, I want you to run a bunch of Monte Carlo simulations and randomize the possible situations, take all my drivers and tell me the best case, the worst case, and the expected case. I will tell you that I would de-emphasize for right now running a lot of those type of scenarios because it assumes that the past performance is the best indicator of future results. When you're in the world of uncertainty planning, which is what we're in right now, you're going to need to be doing more direct input because the system has never seen anything like this. It's going to assume that things are blips that will quickly resolve. Once we get farther in, it's going to establish, it's going to have a bit of a trend, it's going to have history to look back to. But for right now, you're going to be doing some dead entry, so just minimize what you're going to have to do. So we talked about the third tool that we need in times of change management, and that's profitability and cost management. What are our most profitable and what are our least profitable products and locations? Far too many companies wait until they're out of money to figure out what they should stop doing, what locations they should close, what products they should discontinue, and sadly, which people should be laid off. Don't let this happen to you. Cash is king. Find out in the next 30 days which stores are costing you money, which facilities are expendable, which people aren't pulling their own weight, which distribution centers you could live without, which products you might keep during aspirational times. Right now, you've got to cut. You need to take those high-level costs. You have to allocate them down by product, by location, by customer, but then you have to take action. You don't want to be implementing a profitability solution in bankruptcy court. The good news is a really fast product to implement. Even better news, if you own an Oracle EPM Enterprise, you own this. They used to charge a whole lot of money for it. Back in the day, it was $25,000 per user when it was on-prem. They sold it for a while separately on cloud, and it was $500 per user. It's now just included with EPM Enterprise. So please, 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 if you own this, this is the time to implement it. More than any other time in history, go do profitability. A majority of organizations have customers and products that erode as much as 50% of their profits. Profitable products and customers subsidize the underperforming ones, and they cloud profit analysis. So we think, yeah, we're overall profitable. What we don't realize is that there are 20, 30, 40% of our customers or products are generating all of our profit, and then we drag them down. So this is a customer profit curve. Some people call it a whale curve. The point of it is to identify product outliers. And then you can slice and dice it and say, well, is it a regional issue? It doesn't seem to be. I mean, I have a few different regions that are profitable and aren't. Let's flip it to just the top 10 most profitable regions. Well, now we can see there are 4 regions, 4.5, that are generating a huge amount of my profitability. What if I flipped it to the bottom 10%? But now you see that there are 3 regions. The Southeast is the worst. Southeast is costing us 26% of our profitability. What about by sales rep? Wow, look at that. There are 2 sales reps, Noella DeClema and somebody else, that are costing us huge amounts of our profitability. So it might be that she or he just has one specific customer that's doing that. But whatever it is, we need to go investigate. We need to figure out who owns these customers so we can go make some changes immediately. Now, here's the first thing that's going to happen when we go to Noella. and say, Noella, dude, like your customers are costing us 16% of our corporate profitability. Then we go to whoever is number 2. It's probably Edward. Hey, Edward. Never mind. It's Kevin. Hey, Kevin, you're costing us 12.57% of our profitability. The first thing they're going to do is challenge the numbers. They're going to go, well, that's because you don't realize all the things that I do and you're allocating too much cost because I have these hugely profitable customers. The good news is we have something in profitability that comes right out of the box called trace allocation. This takes away that black box of you just get a final number and so be it, deal with it. This lets you visually follow the flow of funds through the model to get that additional level of transparency. And we can just keep expanding and expanding, expanding and see how those allocated expense dollars get allocated down to the products, customers, and services. See the contribution amount. I can choose what dimension I want to trace it through. I can choose how far down I want to go in the level of detail. I can see the total dollars allocated out. I can trace through those rules to look at the dollars all the way down to an individual product level if I wanted to. This not only gets you out of arguments where people say, well, that's a magic number, I don't know what to do with it. It also lets you improve your profitability analytics going forward. So if you do see something where somebody says, well, that's not right, you just did a peanut butter spread and give everybody the same amount equally, you can revise that. And we can say, well, okay, you're right, that is uneven. Let's instead base your allocation of customer call center expenses to how many calls your customer makes to the call center. So if you make over half the calls to the call center, you're getting over half of the call center dollars allocated to your product or your customer. So let's jump back into an industry example. Financial services. Financial services are going through both good and bad times right now. Obviously, from a brick and mortar standpoint, all banking branch locations are closed. That said, people are turning to them because they are the ones loaning the money. They're the ones who have available credit. Those are the ones who are providing liquidity both to businesses and to households. But they're under far more restrictions than the average industry. There's a lot of governmental reporting that has to happen, especially if they get up to the category of being too big to fail. They fall into above 10 billion a year in revenue or a certain amount of assets. They have to make sure that they are not stressing their financials too much. They're not loaning too much money out. They are dealing with people not paying their mortgages. There are people defaulting on credit already, so they have to go model all of that. So as this happens, we have to start visualizing it. We have to figure out, okay, how are we going to deal with those things? And it's not just banks analyzing in real time. Anytime somebody wants to get a big picture view of trends in real time, they should be doing data visualization. Now, there are a couple of ways for business users to do this quickly inside Oracle EPM Cloud without having to jump out to a complex IT-intensive dashboarding program. If your financials are already in Oracle EPM, I just do it there. It's quick, it's dirty, it's fast. Here's the good news. There are some dashboards that are actually already built into Oracle EPM. They give you this heads-up display of your financials. There are people, though, like I built one earlier. I showed you my COVID-19 dashboard. Sometimes you want completely custom visualizations. You don't want to take the default dashboards or modify the default dashboards. You want to put them all onto a display so you can manage your KPIs that are changing daily during this economic uncertainty. So because we don't want to wait until the month or the quarter closes, we can take those 5 or 10 KPIs and we can drag them all together. One of the features that EPM Cloud has, again, comes right out of the box, are what are called infolettes. These are simple visualizations that you can just sprinkle anywhere you need them inside of Oracle EPM. It's got a really simple drag and drop interface. It literally takes minutes to learn. I'm not exaggerating. I think I've even made an 8-minute video on how to do it. One of the powerful ways you can use those infolettes is to show small bits of information during navigation flows, so that the user can see how information is progressing as they go through their reforecasting process or go through their close process. So they can get down, there could be an infolet showing how much they're off of forecast. They go, you can continue on, but you're missing forecast by 20% right now. Or there could be an infolet that says your cash flow is falling negative or you're disrupting your whole supply chain right now. I can also take those infolets and I can combine them with other more sophisticated graphics and I can make a dashboard. And it takes minutes, it doesn't take days, which is good. Because when the economy is changing like it is, you don't have days out there. And if you do have people hashtag WFHing, working from home, but not on a laptop, it's the exact same dashboard. So the key is not how you're going to display it. The key is not how pretty it's going to be. The key is how can I get information to people in real time so that they can make different actions than they would otherwise take. We can't do that traditional, let's wait 30 to 45 days to see information method of reporting. You can't do that while the economy is in free fall. The fourth tool we need right now, beyond data visualization, the fifth tool, is narrative reporting. Narrative reporting helps us give context to why our numbers aren't coming in line with our original forecasts. When we're looking at narration, it's a matter of figuring out how to take our scenarios, take our numbers, take our plans, and communicate them out. We have to take all that information, we have to give it context. So when you hear narrative reporting, just think about it as context to your data, or even more simply, explaining why your budget is off. The most common place you'll see narrative reporting is variance analysis. Variance analysis lets you have a constructive dialogue about why your budgets are off, because we all agree they're going to be off. But there are other usages. You can use narrative reporting to prepare books of reports. You can use it to distribute packages of information. You can use it to open up a dialogue ahead of time about your numbers. Narrative reporting is the way of unjamming the lines of communication, cutting the Gordian knot, so that you have a constructive conversation about why our numbers are off and what we're going to do about it. You don't want to put yourself in the position of saying once your quarterly numbers come in, especially on an investor call, that's a really good question, why our budgets are off. I would say that they're off because of the coronavirus thing. So who has the next question? Those types of answers are going to make Wall Street pummel your stock price. They will get your CFO fired, which I don't know, maybe your goal. Our goal is we want the market to react with good information. So we can use narrative reporting to bundle up a really nice report for us. And this is an example from my health system I created earlier. Like, wow, way back then. Yes, earlier in today's presentation, I created my IRC health systems. That is a picture of our CEO, who looks suspiciously like my father. We've taken all these reports, some of them coming from Oracle EPM, some of them coming from footnotes, some of them coming from Word documents, PowerPoint presentations. We're bundling it all up together. These grids are easy to refresh. If I basically went and regenerated this right now and any of the underlying numbers changed, including that prolonged contraction scenario that I just created, notice it's right there inside of my grid already. So when I'm logging into the system, I'm going to be Bob. Keep in mind, Bob is incorrigible. So Bob logs in and he's ready to start the review phase of our application. So he's going to go look at those scenarios that we've been creating. And we're going to go out here and pull up our package. Now it shows me all the different parts, the cover page, the table of contents, the supporting content. I'm going to go ahead and pull up the overall report and I can drill into it. Now I notice that the numbers aren't looking terribly great. I can go ahead and make some comments on it. And that's really where a lot of people think of narrative reporting's sweet spot, is rather than just reporting being one way, reporting is now a two-way conversation. So I can go out and if there's any point where I go, wow, head and neck doesn't look good, or pediatrics doesn't look good, or we should be really sending more of our physicians over to ICU or more of our physicians over to emergency. I can also ask questions. Maybe I'm not sure that this is the latest data. So I'm saying, is this the latest data from management reporting? Make sure that it is before it actually gets reported out. So there's InterRel Bob up there making this comment at 6:50 a.m. And you don't have to just highlight the grid, you don't have to highlight the numbers. I can make comments on text as well. So I could say, let's confirm with the CFO that we're going to increase contract staffing before we actually do it. Now that I'm done with my commentary, Maria, who is my alter ego who generates reports, can log back in. And now she says, great, my report's ready to be published. I can preview it. Looks good, make sure I've dealt with all the comments that are out there. If there are still some other comments, I can leave them actually in the report as footnotes. So when the report generates, it puts that information towards the end of it. So in this case, it was a question, so really having a conversation. I don't want this to be a footnote. Yep, just updated it, Bob. Thanks for having my back. Why do you always verify I haven't done my job? And CFO has approved the plan. Excellent, we are now fully ready to publish. So the review stage is complete. At that point, I can go generate a report and I can send it back out. So to bring all this together, if there was one thing I was going to remember from today's presentation, your clients need information now more than ever. Oh, somebody asked a couple of questions. I'm going to tackle a few of these before I move forward. One of the questions that came up was, what do you think it's better to use a new scenario versus introducing a new version? A new scenario is meant to be, we think this is a different situation. Like we think this is going to be a totally different set of numbers than otherwise. Like we think the recession is going to last longer, or we think we're going to see a huge burst in revenue, but it's not going to last very long. A version should be an iteration of that scenario. So in my very first example at the beginning, I said I'm going to make a delayed recovery, but then I'm going to come up with multiple mitigation plans. Delayed recovery is a scenario because I think the B recession is going to look like this. The mitigation plans become versions. Or if you want to edit it, want to do some what ifing, those tend to become versions. When you're ready to go, yep, this is a scenario we should keep out there, we should set up a series of actions and deal with it, then it's a scenario. So we need to bring all this information together. We need to have scenario planning to help us plan for possible scenarios. We need to have strategic modeling to figure out how to stay within our constraints. We need to have profitability and cost management so we know what areas are making money and what areas are losing money. We have to have data visualization, real-time analytics, so we can see data as it comes in. We can take action now. We have to have narrative reporting so that we can have a better conversation about all of our numbers. Speaking of conversations, if you need help now, this is the only plug. I've done literally no other slides, so bear with me for one. I've prepared several fixed price offerings to give you advice on what to do to plan for the uncertainty that we're living through for the next 2+ years. Normally, these offerings run from $2,000 to $10,000, but today, since you listened to me for an entire hour, and I genuinely appreciate it, I'm dropping the price of one of those to $0. As CEO, they don't let me make a lot of changes like this, but I can just periodically just overrule pricing. So once in a while, don't try and pull that card that often. So if you want to see more information on how I can answer some questions about all this, if you want to hop on the phone with me, go to interroll.com/offers, and I can give you some guidance on advice on how to deal with all of this. As I said in the beginning, this is a 10-week journey. The one thing we know for certain in the next 10 weeks is that 10 weeks will pass. And while I'm not entirely certain of this, I'm hopeful that you and I will be together for each of those next 10 weeks. So if you feel like, wow, that scenario planning is really interesting, I want to hear more about it, come back on 5/6. If you want to understand how to close your books while your team is working virtually, come back on 4/29. If you want to join us for the entire journey, I assure you there will be great results at the end as our rocket heads off into space. If you want to stay up to date on additional webcasts, additional news, I encourage you to check out Interroll Finance News. Go to interroll.com/updates. That's interroll.com/updates. Stay up to date on all the information as it changes. This is Edward Roske, not only CEO of Interroll, but also editor-in-chief of Interroll Finance News. Stay safe out there.